long before the pyramids cast their long shadows across the sands of Egypt, or the grandeur of Rome was even a whisper in the minds of men. The very first sparks of civilization ignited in a land cradled between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. This fertile crescent, known to history as Mesopotamia, meaning the land between the rivers, was the stage upon which humanity first began its monumental journey from scattered nomadic tribes to settled communities, laying the foundational stones for what would eventually become the mighty Babylonian Empire. It was here, around 4500 BCE, that the earliest human settlements began to coalesce, drawn by the life-giving waters and the rich alluvial soil deposited by the annual floods. Imagine a world where the horizon stretched endlessly, broken only by the gentle undulations of the land and the shimmering ribbons of water. The air, warm and often heavy with the scent of damp earth and burgeoning reeds, hummed with the nascent energy of human endeavor. These early settlers, often referred to as the Ubaid people, were not merely surviving. They were beginning to thrive. They learned to channel the capricious rivers, digging rudimentary canals to irrigate their fields of barley and wheat, transforming arid plains into verdant breadbaskets. Their homes, simple structures of mud brick, clustered together, forming the nuclei of what would soon blossom into villages and then, astonishingly, into the world's first cities. As the centuries turned, around 4000 BCE, a new culture began to emerge in southern Mesopotamia, particularly in the region later known as Sumer. These were the Sumerians, a people whose origins remain shrouded in the mists of antiquity, a subject of ongoing scholarly debate. Were they indigenous to the region, evolving from the Ubaid culture, or did they migrate from elsewhere, bringing with them a unique language and a revolutionary spirit of innovation? Historians still disagree whether their distinct language, unrelated to any other known linguistic family, points to an external origin or simply an isolated development within Mesopotamia itself. Regardless of their genesis, the Sumerians proved to be extraordinary architects of civilization. Their genius manifested in many ways, perhaps most notably in the development of writing. Around 3200 BCE, in cities like Uruk, the Sumerians began to press reed styluses into wet clay tablets, creating pictograms that evolved into a complex system of wedge-shaped marks known as cuneiform. This wasn't merely a way to record transactions, though that was certainly its initial impetus, keeping track of temple offerings and agricultural yields. It was a monumental leap in human communication, allowing for the transmission of knowledge, laws, literature, and history across time and space, far beyond the ephemeral nature of spoken word. Imagine the quiet intensity of a scribe, hunched over a clay tablet, carefully inscribing symbols that would outlast empires. These nascent cities were not just collections of dwellings. They were vibrant, self-governing entities, each centered around a towering ziggurat, a stepped temple dedicated to their patron deity. The ziggurat, rising above the flat landscape, was not only a religious edifice, but also the economic and administrative heart of the city-state. It was here that grain was stored, goods were traded, and decisions that shaped the lives of thousands were made. Cities like Uruk, Ur, Lagash and Kish grew into powerful urban centers, each with its own king or ensi, ruler, its own laws, and its own sphere of influence. This period, roughly from 2900 to 2350 BCE, is often referred to as the early dynastic period, a time of independent city-states vying for dominance. Life within these Sumerian city-states was a complex tapestry of activity. Farmers toiled in the irrigated fields, their lives dictated by the rhythm of the rivers and the sun. Artisans crafted pottery, textiles, and intricate metalwork, their skills honed over generations. Merchants navigated the waterways, exchanging goods with neighboring cities and distant lands, their boats laden with grain, wool, and precious minerals. And at the apex of this society were the priests and kings, who, often seen as intermediaries between humanity and the divine, wielded immense power. The Sumerians were deeply religious, believing that their cities were the property of the gods, and that humanity's purpose was to serve these deities, ensuring the prosperity of the land. One lesser-known detail from this era is the Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the earliest surviving works of literature, which tells the story of Gilgamesh, a legendary king of Uruk. While much of it is myth, it offers a fascinating glimpse into Sumerian beliefs about heroism, friendship, mortality, and the quest for immortality. The epic describes Gilgamesh's journey to find eternal life, his encounter with a great flood, and his eventual acceptance of his human limitations. It's a profound narrative that resonated deeply with the Sumerian psyche, reflecting their understanding of the unpredictable forces of nature and the human condition. Despite their shared culture and language, the Sumerian city-states were often in conflict. Borders were fluid, resources were coveted, and ambitions clashed. Walls were built not just for protection against nomadic raiders, but also against rival cities. The landscape was dotted with watchtowers, and the air was often thick with the tension of impending skirmishes. These conflicts, while disruptive, also spurred innovation in warfare and political organization, leading to larger, more centralized armies and more sophisticated strategies. The constant struggle for supremacy meant that no single Sumerian city-state ever truly dominated the entire region for an extended period, creating a dynamic and often volatile political landscape. Around 2334 BCE, a new power emerged from the north of Sumer, forever altering the course of Mesopotamian history. This was Sargon of Akkad, a figure of humble origins who rose to become one of the most significant rulers in ancient history. His story, shrouded in legend, tells of him being found as a baby in a basket on the river, much like the later Moses. Sargon, whose name means the legitimate king, established the Akkadian Empire, the world's first true empire, by conquering the disparate Sumerian city-states and uniting them under a single rule. He moved his capital to Akkad, a city whose exact location remains unknown, adding another layer of mystery to his extraordinary reign. Sargon's empire was vast for its time. Stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, he maintained control through a centralized administration, appointing governors to oversee conquered territories and establishing a standing army, a formidable force that ensured his authority. This marked a profound shift from the independent city-states to a unified imperial system. The Akkadian language, related to later Semitic languages like Assyrian and Babylonian, began to spread, though Sumerian continued to be used for religious and scholarly purposes. For nearly a century, the Akkadian Empire brought a period of relative peace and prosperity to Mesopotamia, fostering trade and cultural exchange on an unprecedented scale. However, empires, even the first ones, are rarely eternal. Around 2154 BCE, the Akkadian Empire collapsed, likely due to a combination of internal rebellions, economic instability, and external pressures from nomadic groups, particularly the Gutians from the Zagros Mountains. The fall of Akkad ushered in a period of fragmentation and chaos, often referred to as the Dark Age of Mesopotamia. The Sumerian city-states reasserted their independence, and for a time, it seemed as though the grand experiment of empire had failed. Yet this period of disunity was not without its own unique developments. Out of the ashes of the Akkadian Empire, a Sumerian resurgence occurred, known as the Neo-Sumerian period or the Ur-III dynasty, beginning around 2112 BCE. The city of Ur, under rulers like Ur-Nammu and Shulgi, once again rose to prominence, establishing a highly centralized and bureaucratic state that rivaled the Akkadian Empire in its organization and reach. Ur-Nammu is particularly famous for promulgating one of the earliest known law codes, predating Hammurabi's by several centuries, which laid down principles of justice and order. This era saw a flourishing of Sumerian culture, art, and literature, a final brilliant chapter for the Sumerians before their eventual decline. But even this Sumerian renaissance was destined to fade. Around 2004 BCE, the Ur-III dynasty collapsed, primarily due to prolonged drought, famine, and persistent incursions from nomadic Amorite tribes from the west. The Amorites, a Semitic-speaking people, had been gradually migrating into Mesopotamia for centuries, often clashing with the established powers. With the weakening of Ur, they began to settle in greater numbers, establishing their own city-states and gradually integrating into the Mesopotamian cultural landscape. This marked the end of Sumerian political dominance, though their cultural legacy, their writing, their myths, their architectural styles would continue to profoundly influence the civilizations that followed. The stage was now set for a new chapter in Mesopotamia's story. The Amorite influx led to a period of fragmented rule once more. But out of this mosaic of competing powers, one city, strategically located on the Euphrates River, began its slow, inexorable rise to prominence. This city was Babylon. Its name in Akkadian meant Gate of God, and it was here, at a new dynasty, founded by the Amorite king Sumu-Abum around 1894 BCE, would begin to consolidate power, laying the direct groundwork for the empire that would one day bear its name. The foundations had been laid, the lessons learned from the rise and fall of Sumerian city-states and the Akkadian Empire, all converging towards the dawn of a new era. The echoes of Uruk's scribes, Ur's ziggurats, and Sargon's conquests all resonated in the very soil from which Babylon would emerge, a testament to the enduring human spirit of innovation and organization in the Fertile Crescent. If you're enjoying this, liking and subscribing truly helps and is much appreciated. As the sun dipped below the Mesopotamian horizon, casting long, shifting shadows across the fertile plains, a new power began to coalesce along the winding Euphrates. The city of Babylon, once a minor administrative center, now stirred with a burgeoning ambition. It was here, around 1894 BCE, that a dynasty would rise, destined to etch its name into the annals of history, the First Babylonian Dynasty. This was not a sudden explosion of power, but a gradual, strategic ascendancy, built upon the foundations laid by earlier, lesser-known rulers like Sumu-La-El, who through careful diplomacy and occasional military skirmishes expanded Babylon's modest territory. Yet, the true zenith of this early Babylonian era, the period that would define its legacy for millennia, awaited the arrival of a single, extraordinary figure. His name was Hammurabi, and he ascended to the throne around 1792 BCE. For the first 2 decades of his reign, Hammurabi focused inward, consolidating his power, strengthening Babylon's defenses and improving its irrigation systems, vital lifelines in a land dependent on the twin rivers. One could almost imagine him walking the dusty streets, observing the flow of water through canals, listening to the murmurs of his people, understanding the intricate dance between prosperity and stability. He was a patient strategist, a master of timing. While his contemporaries, the kings of Larsa, Eshnunna, and Mari, engaged in their own power struggles, Hammurabi meticulously built his strength, a silent, growing tide. The pivotal moment arrived around his 30th regnal year. The political landscape of Mesopotamia was a complex tapestry of shifting alliances and rivalries. Hammurabi, no longer content with merely holding his own, began to assert Babylon's dominance. He first turned his attention south, conquering Larsa, a powerful city-state that had long vied for supremacy in the region. This victory, achieved around 1763 BCE, was not merely a military triumph. It was a psychological one, signaling Babylon's emergence as a formidable force. One can almost hear the distant echoes of trumpets and the murmur of crowds as news of Larsa's fall reached the farthest corners of the land. With Larsa subdued, Hammurabi systematically brought other key city-states under his control. Eshnunna, to the east, fell around 1761 BCE, followed by Mari, the magnificent city on the Middle Euphrates, around 1759 BCE. The conquest of Mari was particularly significant, as its extensive archives, discovered in the 20th century, have provided invaluable insights into the diplomatic relations and daily life of the period. Perhaps these clay tablets, inscribed with cuneiform, still whisper stories of Hammurabi's strategic brilliance and the complex political maneuvering of his time. By the end of his reign, Hammurabi had forged an empire that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the upper reaches of the Tigris and Euphrates, an unprecedented feat for a ruler originating from Babylon. Yet Hammurabi's enduring legacy rests not solely on his military prowess, but on a different kind of conquest, the conquest of chaos through law. It was during his reign, most likely in the latter half, that the famous Code of Hammurabi was compiled. This collection of 282 laws, meticulously carved onto a towering black basalt stele, now housed in the Louvre Museum, stands as one of the earliest and most complete legal codes known from ancient times. Imagine the sheer effort, the dedication, involved in carving such a monumental text. Each cuneiform wedge a testament to a desire for order and justice. The stele itself is a powerful symbol. At its top, Hammurabi is depicted standing before Shamash, the sun god and god of justice, receiving the laws directly from the deity. This imagery was crucial. It imbued the laws with divine authority, making them not merely the dictates of a king, but the sacred principles of the gods themselves. This was a common practice in ancient Near Eastern kingship, but Hammurabi's execution of it, combined with the comprehensive nature of his code, set it apart. The laws themselves covered a vast array of societal aspects, from family law and property rights to trade regulations and punishments for various offenses. They were remarkably detailed, often specifying different penalties based on social status, a free person, a commoner, or a slave. For instance, if a free person broke the bone of another free person, the law prescribed that their own bone should be broken in return. A clear articulation of the eye for an eye principle, or lex talionis. However, if a free person broke the bone of a commoner, the penalty was a fine. This distinction highlights the stratified nature of Babylonian society. a reality woven into the fabric of their legal system. One lesser-known detail about the Code of Hammurabi is its emphasis on consumer protection. There are laws, for example, that hold builders responsible if a house they construct collapses and causes death, or if a boat they build sinks. This speaks to a surprising level of governmental oversight and a concern for public safety that might seem modern in its sensibility. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about establishing standards and accountability. Historians still debate the precise purpose and practical application of the code. Was it a comprehensive legal document intended to be applied directly in every court case? Or was it more of a monument, a declaration of Hammurabi's commitment to justice, a guide for judges, and a propaganda tool to showcase his wisdom and divine favor? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. While it's improbable that every single case was decided by direct reference to the stele, its principles certainly guided legal proceedings, and its public display served as a constant reminder of the king's authority and the expected standards of conduct. It was a tangible manifestation of the rule of law, even if its implementation was nuanced. Beyond the legal code, Hammurabi's reign saw significant advancements in administration and infrastructure. He appointed governors and officials to manage his vast empire, ensuring the smooth collection of taxes and the maintenance of order. He also undertook extensive building projects, including temples, ziggurats, and most importantly, irrigation canals. These canals were the lifeblood of Mesopotamia, transforming arid lands into fertile fields, ensuring abundant harvests, and supporting a growing population. One can envision the intricate network of waterways, glistening under the hot sun, bringing life to the parched earth, a testament to Hammurabi's practical vision. The city of Babylon itself flourished under his rule. It became a vibrant center of trade, culture, and learning. Merchants from distant lands would have flocked to its bustling markets, their caravans laden with exotic goods. Scribes, trained in the intricate art of cuneiform, would have diligently recorded transactions, legal judgments, and literary works on clay tablets. The air would have been thick with the scent of spices, the murmur of many languages, and the rhythmic clang of artisans at work. Perhaps the very stones of Babylon, long since crumbled to dust, still hold the faint echoes of this golden age. Hammurabi's reign, lasting for 43 years, was a period of unprecedented stability and prosperity for Babylon. His strategic brilliance, his administrative reforms, and his groundbreaking legal code laid the foundations for a powerful and enduring empire. When he passed away around 1750 BCE, he left behind a transformed Mesopotamia, unified under Babylonian hegemony. However, even the most carefully constructed empires are subject to the relentless currents of history. Hammurabi's successors, though inheriting a strong kingdom, faced increasing challenges. The vastness of the empire, while a testament to Hammurabi's ambition, also presented significant. There were no administrative difficulties. Maintaining control over diverse regions with their own traditions and loyalties proved to be an ongoing struggle. Furthermore, new threats began to emerge on the periphery of the empire. Nomadic groups, particularly the Kassites from the Zagros Mountains, began to exert pressure on Babylon's eastern frontiers. These were not always direct military invasions at first, but rather a slow, persistent infiltration. A gradual chipping away at the edges of the established order. The once unified empire began to show signs of strain, like a finely woven tapestry slowly unraveling at its seams. The reigns of Hammurabi's immediate successors, like Samsu-iluna and Abiyeshu, were marked by a continuous struggle to maintain the territorial integrity of the empire. Rebellions in the south, particularly in the region known as the Sealand, became a recurring problem. These were not minor skirmishes. They were protracted conflicts that drained resources and manpower, weakening Babylon's central authority. The once dominant city found itself increasingly on the defensive, struggling to retain the vast dominion Hammurabi had so meticulously built. The economic prosperity that had characterized Hammurabi's reign also began to wane. The disruption caused by constant warfare, the loss of control over key trade routes, and the administrative burden of a sprawling empire led to a decline in agricultural output and commercial activity. The grand irrigation systems, once a symbol of Babylonian ingenuity, may have suffered from neglect in some areas, further impacting the land's productivity. The ultimate demise of the First Babylonian Dynasty was not a sudden, cataclysmic event, but a slow, gradual decline, punctuated by moments of crisis. Around 1595 BCE, a devastating raid by the Hittites, led by King Mursili I, struck a fatal blow. The Hittites, a powerful people from Anatolia, swept down into Mesopotamia, sacked Babylon, and carried off its patron deity, the statue of Marduk. This was not an occupation, but a destructive raid, a lightning strike that left the city vulnerable and demoralized. The psychological impact of losing their divine protector, the very symbol of their city's power, would have been immense. The Hittites, having achieved their objective, retreated, leaving a power vacuum in their wake. It was then that the Kassites, who had been gradually migrating into Mesopotamia for centuries, seized their opportunity. They moved into the heartland of Babylonia, establishing their own dynasty and ushering in a new era. The First Babylonian Dynasty, which had risen to such heights under Hammurabi, finally faded from prominence. Its legacy preserved primarily through the enduring power of its legal code and the memory of its golden age. The mighty walls of Babylon, which had once stood as a testament to Hammurabi's power, perhaps whispered stories of conquest and decline to the desert winds, their glory now a distant echo. Yet the foundations laid by Hammurabi, the very idea of a unified Mesopotamian empire governed by a comprehensive legal system, would continue to influence subsequent civilizations for centuries to come. The grandeur of Hammurabi's unified realm, a tapestry woven with justice and codified laws, could not, in the end, defy the relentless currents of time and the shifting sands of power. Though his reign marked a zenith, the seeds of decline were subtly sown even within its brilliance. Successors, while striving to uphold his legacy, found themselves grappling with an empire grown unwieldy, its vastness a challenge to central authority. The intricate irrigation systems, the very lifeblood of Mesopotamia, began to suffer from neglect in some regions, leading to decreased agricultural yields and localized unrest. The great cities, once bustling centers of trade and intellectual pursuit, felt the strain of maintaining their defenses against increasingly bold incursions from the fringes of the empire. Around 1595 BCE, a cataclysmic event, swift and devastating, brought the First Babylonian Dynasty to an abrupt and fiery end. From the northwest, a formidable force emerged. The Hittites, an Indo-European people whose burgeoning empire in Anatolia had been steadily growing in strength and ambition. Their king, Mursili I, led a daring and unexpected raid deep into the heart of Mesopotamia. This was not an invasion aimed at permanent conquest, but rather a lightning strike, a display of raw power. They sacked Babylon, the very jewel of the empire, leaving it in ruins and carrying off its most sacred treasures, including the cult statues of Marduk, the city's patron deity. The psychological impact of this event was immense, shattering the illusion of Babylonian invincibility and plunging the region into a period of profound instability. The Hammurabic dynasty, weakened by internal pressures and now decapitated by this foreign assault, crumbled. In the ensuing chaos, a new power slowly began to assert itself in the fractured landscape of Mesopotamia. These were the Kassites, a people of obscure origin, likely from the Zagros Mountains to the east. Unlike the swift, destructive raid of the Hittites, the Kassite ascendancy was a gradual, almost imperceptible infiltration. They did not conquer Babylon in a single decisive battle, but rather over decades, perhaps even a century, they steadily gained influence, first as mercenaries, then as administrators, and finally as rulers. By the mid-16th century BCE, they had established themselves as the dominant power in Babylonia, founding what historians refer to as the Kassite Dynasty, or the Third Dynasty of Babylon. Their rule would endure for over 4 centuries, one of the longest continuous dynasties in Mesopotamian history. The Kassite period, often overshadowed by the more dramatic rise and fall of earlier empires, presents a fascinating paradox. It was a time of relative stability and peace after the tumultuous end of the First Dynasty, yet it lacked the dynamic innovation and expansive reach of Hammurabi's era. The Kassite kings, rather than imposing their own culture, largely adopted and preserved the existing Babylonian traditions. They revered the ancient gods, rebuilt temples, and continued to use Akkadian as the language of administration and literature. This assimilation was so thorough that distinguishing Kassite influence from Babylonian tradition can be quite challenging for archaeologists. For instance, while they maintained the administrative structures, they introduced a unique form of land grant document known as a kuduru, a stone stele often intricately carved with divine symbols and the king's image, detailing legal agreements and land ownership. These kudurus are invaluable sources for understanding Kassite society and their legal practices. One of the more intriguing aspects of Kassite rule is the extent of their diplomatic engagement with other major powers of the Late Bronze Age. The Amarna letters, a collection of diplomatic correspondence discovered in Egypt, reveal a world of intricate international relations. Kassite kings, notably Burnaburiash II, exchange lavish gifts, royal daughters in marriage, and formal letters with the pharaohs of Egypt, the Hittite kings, and the rulers of Assyria and Mitanni. These letters, written in Akkadian cuneiform, the lingua franca of the time, paint a picture of a sophisticated diplomatic network, where even minor slights or delays in tribute could spark elaborate complaints. Historians still debate the true nature of these relationships. Were they alliances of equals, or was there a subtle hierarchy at play, with each power jockeying for perceived dominance? The Kassite kings, despite their adoption of Babylonian customs, often referred to themselves as King of Karduniash, their own term for Babylonia, hinting at a distinct identity within their adopted land. Life under Kassite rule, particularly in the later periods, seems to have been marked by a certain quiet prosperity, especially in the agricultural heartland. They focused on maintaining the irrigation networks and ensuring the fertility of the land. While grand new architectural projects were less common than in earlier eras, the Kassites were meticulous in their restoration of older temples and ziggurats. They also fostered a renewed interest in scholarly pursuits, particularly in astronomy and divination. Babylonian scribes continued to compile and refine astronomical observations, contributing to the long tradition of Mesopotamian celestial knowledge. Yet this long period of stability also saw a gradual weakening of central authority over time, as regional governors and tribal leaders gained more autonomy. The decline of Kassite power was not a sudden collapse, but a protracted struggle, primarily against the rising might of Assyria to the north and Elam to the east. Assyria, which had itself been under the sway of the Mitanni kingdom for a time, began to reassert its independence and expand its territory. The Elamites, traditional rivals of Babylonia, seized opportunities to raid and conquer Babylonian cities, driven by a desire for plunder and control over key trade routes. The strategic city of Dur-Kurigalzu, founded by the Kassite king Kurigalzu I as a new capital, stood as a testament to their ambition and their efforts to consolidate power. Its impressive ziggurat, one of the best-preserved Kassite structures, still speaks of their architectural prowess, though it now lies in ruins. The final blow to the Kassite dynasty came from Elam. Around 1155 BCE, the Elamite king Shutruk-Nahunte I launched a devastating campaign against Babylonia. He sacked Babylon once more, carrying off not only vast quantities of plunder, but also many of the iconic monuments and stelas that symbolized Babylonian heritage, including the famous law code of Hammurabi and the Naram Sin stela. These treasures were taken to Susa, the Elamite capital, where some of them were later rediscovered by archaeologists. The removal of such significant cultural artifacts was a profound humiliation, signaling the definitive end of Kassite rule and ushering in another period of fragmentation and foreign domination. The centuries following the fall of the Kassites are often referred to as a dark age in Babylonian history, a period marked by political instability, a succession of short-lived dynasties, and intermittent foreign control. The Elamites themselves could not maintain firm control over Babylonia for long. Various local dynasties, often centered around the city of Isin, attempted to revive Babylonian independence, but their control was tenuous and their reigns brief. This era saw the rise of the second dynasty of Isin and other minor kings, but none could truly restore the glory or stability of earlier periods. This fragmentation was exacerbated by the arrival of new peoples into Mesopotamia. The Arameans, a Semitic people from the Levant, began to migrate and settle in large numbers, particularly in the western and southern regions of Babylonia. Their presence further complicated the political landscape, as they formed independent tribal groups and small kingdoms, often clashing with the established Babylonian cities. The linguistic landscape also began to shift, with Aramaic gradually gaining ground as a spoken language, though Akkadian remained the language of scholarship and official records. The constant movement of these groups, their shifting loyalties, and their occasional raids on settled areas contributed to the overall sense of insecurity and decline. During these fragmented centuries, the great cities of Babylonia, though still inhabited, suffered from neglect. Temples fell into disrepair, and the intricate network of canals, vital for agriculture, was not always maintained, leading to localized famines and a decline in population. The once vibrant intellectual life of Babylon also waned, though the scribal traditions persisted in isolated pockets, keeping alive the ancient knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and literature. Perhaps these walls, now crumbling, whispered stories of past glories to the stars, awaiting a new dawn. This period of weakness made Babylonia particularly vulnerable to the resurgence of its northern neighbor, Assyria. The Assyrians, under a series of powerful and aggressive kings, were beginning to forge a vast new empire. They saw Babylonia, with its fertile lands and ancient cities, as a prize. While they initially faced resistance from various Babylonian and Aramaean rulers, the Assyrian military machine, known for its efficiency and brutality, gradually extended its influence southwards. The relationship between Assyria and Babylonia during this time was complex and often fraught. Sometimes Assyrian kings would directly rule Babylonia, appointing governors or even taking the title of King of Babylon themselves. At other times, they would install puppet kings or allow a degree of local autonomy, as long as tribute was paid and loyalty maintained. One lesser-known detail from this period concerns the Sealand dynasty, a region in the marshy, southern reaches of Babylonia near the Persian Gulf. This area, often difficult to access and control, provided a refuge for various groups, including remnants of the Kassite population and independent Aramaean tribes. Kings from this region occasionally challenged the dominant powers, whether Elamite, Babylonian, or Assyrian, maintaining a precarious independence for periods. Their existence highlights the fragmented nature of power during these dark ages, where central authority was often challenged by resilient local strongholds. The scholarly dispute surrounding this dark age often revolves around its true nature. Was it a period of complete societal collapse, or merely a temporary decline in central authority, with local communities largely continuing their way of life? While the monumental building projects and grand imperial narratives certainly diminished, evidence suggests that trade continued, albeit on a smaller scale, and that scribal schools, though perhaps fewer in number, still functioned. The resilience of Babylonian culture, its deep-rooted traditions, and its enduring religious beliefs allowed it to survive these periods of political upheaval. Much like a deeply rooted tree weathering a storm, the seeds of future revivals, though dormant, were still present, waiting for the right conditions to sprout anew. The long night of foreign domination and fragmentation was indeed a testing time, but it also forged a deeper sense of Babylonian identity, a longing for a return to its former glory, a desire that would eventually fuel its magnificent resurgence. The gentle sway of the palm trees, once a constant companion to the rhythm of life along the Euphrates, began to feel a different kind of breeze, one that carried the dust of distant lands and the scent of iron. The age of independent city-states, where alliances shifted like desert sands and conflicts were often localized, was drawing to a close. A new power was rising in the north, a formidable force that would cast a long, dark shadow over Mesopotamia. The Neo-Assyrian Empire. From their heartland in what is now northern Iraq, the Assyrians had been steadily consolidating their strength for centuries. But it was in the early first millennium BCE that their imperial ambitions truly began to unfurl with terrifying efficiency. Their military machine was unlike anything seen before, a meticulously organized and brutally effective instrument of conquest. Unlike the Babylonians, who often sought to integrate conquered peoples into their cultural sphere, the Assyrians employed a policy of systematic terror and mass deportation. Their annals, carved into stone reliefs that depicted scenes of unimaginable cruelty, enemies flayed alive, impaled on stakes, or led away in chains, were not merely historical records. They were propaganda, designed to instill fear and discourage rebellion. By the 9th century BCE, under kings like Ashurnasirpal II, Assyrian expansion began in earnest. Their chariots thundered across the plains, their archers rained down arrows, and their siege engines battered city walls into submission. The wealth of Mesopotamia, the fertile crescent that had nurtured civilization for millennia, became a tempting prize. Babylon, with its ancient heritage and strategic location, was a particular target. Yet, it was also a city that commanded a certain reverence, even from its conquerors. Its gods, its traditions, its very name, held a power that even the Assyrians acknowledged. The relationship between Assyria and Babylonia was complex, a turbulent dance of domination and resistance. Sometimes, Babylon was treated as a vassal state, allowed a degree of autonomy under an Assyrian-appointed king, or even an Assyrian monarch who adopted the title King of Sumer and Akkad to legitimize his rule in the south. At other times, when Babylonian cities dared to assert their independence or align with Assyria's enemies, the retribution was swift and devastating. The Assyrian kings, while often cruel, also understood the prestige associated with controlling Babylon. They would sometimes present themselves as protectors of Marduk, the city's patron deity, even as they plundered its resources. One of the most defining periods of this subjugation occurred in the late 8th and early 7th centuries BCE. The reign of Tiglath-Pileser III, who came to power in 745 BCE, marked a significant turning point. He revolutionized the Assyrian military and administrative systems, creating a truly centralized empire. His campaigns pushed Assyrian borders further than ever before, and Babylonia found itself firmly within his grasp. He even took the throne of Babylon himself, under the name Pulu, demonstrating the Assyrian desire to directly control the southern kingdom, rather than merely extract tribute. The cycle of rebellion and repression continued. The Chaldeans, a Semitic people who had migrated into southern Mesopotamia and often allied with Elam to the east, frequently stirred up trouble for Assyrian overlords in Babylon. These frequent uprisings often led to brutal Assyrian responses. The city of Babylon itself, once the undisputed heart of the south, became a pawn in this larger imperial game. Its famous ziggurat, Etemenanki, and the temples dedicated to its gods stood as silent witnesses to the ebb and flow of Assyrian power. Perhaps the most dramatic and devastating episode in this period was the destruction of Babylon by Sennacherib. After years of intermittent revolts, culminating in a major rebellion led by Mushezib-Marduk with Elamite support, Sennacherib, whose own inscriptions boast of his ruthlessness, decided to make an example of the rebellious city. In 689 BCE, his armies laid siege to Babylon. When it fell, the Assyrian king unleashed his fury. He ordered the city to be utterly destroyed. Its magnificent walls were torn down, its temples and palaces razed to the ground, and its canals diverted to flood the ruins, turning the once proud metropolis into a swamp. Sennacherib even claimed to have carried off the cult statue of Marduk, though its ultimate fate remains a point of scholarly dispute. Some historians believe it was indeed taken to Assyria, while others suggest it might have been hidden or destroyed, its absence a potent symbol of Babylon's humiliation. The scale of this destruction was unprecedented for Babylon, a deliberate act of cultural annihilation designed to crush the spirit of the Babylonian people and prevent future uprisings. For a time, Babylon ceased to exist as a major urban center. The shockwaves of this event resonated throughout the ancient Near East. Yet, even in its ruin, the memory of Babylon endured. Sennacherib's successor, Esarhaddon, had a different vision. Perhaps he felt remorse, or perhaps he understood the deep religious and political significance of Babylon to the region, and that its utter destruction was counterproductive to long-term stability. He embarked on a massive rebuilding program, restoring the city's temples, walls, and canals, and returning the cult statue of Marduk, or a replacement, if the original was truly lost. This act of restoration, beginning around 681 BCE, was a testament to Babylon's enduring spiritual and cultural importance, even under the heel of its conquerors. It also reflected a shift in Assyrian policy, recognizing that outright destruction might not be the most effective way to manage a restive yet revered territory. Under Esarhaddon and his successor Ashurbanipal, Babylon was largely peaceful, though still firmly under Assyrian control. Ashurbanipal, known for his vast library at Nineveh, also demonstrated a keen interest in Babylonian culture, even learning to read and write in Sumerian and Akkadian. He appointed his brother, Shamash-shum-ukin, as king of Babylon, hoping to foster a more stable relationship. However, this arrangement ultimately failed. Shamash-shum-ukin, chafing under his brother's authority, eventually led a grand coalition of rebellious forces, including the Chaldeans, Elamites, and Arab tribes, against Ashurbanipal. This massive civil war, lasting from 652 to 648 BCE, plunged the entire empire into chaos. Ashurbanipal eventually triumphed, but the effort exhausted Assyria's resources and manpower. Babylon was once again besieged and suffered terribly, though it was not utterly destroyed this time. Shamash-shum-ukin reportedly perished in a fire within his palace rather than surrender. The Assyrian Shadow, though long and oppressive, contained the seeds of its own demise. The constant warfare, the brutal policies that fueled resentment, and the immense cost of maintaining such a vast empire began to take their toll. The very strength of the Assyrian military, while formidable, was stretched thin across distant frontiers. The rich resources of Mesopotamia, once a source of strength for Assyria, became a drain as rebellions flared repeatedly. While Assyria represented the pinnacle of military might and imperial organization, its rule was ultimately unsustainable due to its own inherent brutality and the deep-seated desire for independence among the conquered peoples. The stage was being set for a dramatic reversal of fortune, a moment when the oppressed would rise, and the great cities of Mesopotamia would once again breathe free, albeit briefly, before the next wave of change swept across the ancient world. The shadows of Assyrian might, though vast, were never absolute. Beneath the polished stone and gleaming bronze, a restless hum of discontent persisted, particularly in the ancient heartland of Babylonia. For all their military prowess, the Assyrians struggled to truly subdue the spirit of a people who had once cradled civilization itself. Each conquest, each imposition of Assyrian governors and taxes seemed only to fan the embers of rebellion, transforming a proud heritage into a potent symbol of resistance. One of the most enduring figures in this long struggle was Merodach-Baladan II, a name that echoed through the annals of both Babylonian defiance and Assyrian frustration. He was a chieftain of the Bit Yakin, a powerful Aramaean tribe nestled in the marshlands of southern Babylonia, a region historically difficult for even the most formidable empires to fully control. From these watery strongholds, Merodach-Baladan emerged as a relentless thorn in Assyria's side. His first significant act of defiance came in 721 BCE, just as the mighty Tiglath-Pileser III, the architect of Assyrian imperial expansion, passed from the scene. Seizing this moment of transition, Merodach-Baladan proclaimed himself king of Babylon, an audacious move that challenged the very core of Assyrian dominion. He understood the symbolic power of Babylon, not just as a city, but as the spiritual and cultural heart of Mesopotamia. To rule Babylon was to claim legitimacy, even as that claim was contested by an overwhelming force. His reign was brief but impactful, lasting only a little over a decade. During this time, he displayed remarkable diplomatic skill, reaching out to other enemies of Assyria, most notably the Elamites to the east, who shared a long history of rivalry with Mesopotamia and a common desire to see Assyrian power curtailed. He even sent envoys as far as Judah, seeking to forge a grand coalition against the common oppressor. This foresight, this understanding that Assyria could only be challenged by a united front, marked him as more than just a tribal leader. He was a statesman of considerable vision. However, the Assyrian war machine, under the command of Sargon II, Tiglath-Pileser's successor, was simply too powerful to be held at bay indefinitely. In 710 BCE, Sargon II launched a devastating campaign, culminating in the siege and recapture of Babylon. Merodach-Baladan was forced to flee back to his marshy refuge, but his spirit of resistance remained unbroken. He would re-emerge years later, after Sargon II's unexpected death and the ascension of Sennacherib to the Assyrian throne in 705 BCE. The transition of power often presented opportunities for rebellion, and Merodach-Baladan seized it once more. He managed to reclaim the throne of Babylon, albeit briefly, for a mere 9 months, before Sennacherib, with his characteristic ruthlessness, swept him aside again. This cycle of rebellion and brutal suppression became a recurring motif in Assyrian-Babylonian relations. Historians still debate the true motivations behind Merodach-Baladan's relentless pursuit of the Babylonian throne. Was it a genuine desire for Babylonian independence, a deep-seated patriotism for the ancient land, or was it primarily a pragmatic quest for power and prestige, leveraging the discontent of the populace for his own gain? Perhaps it was a complex blend of both, a reflection of the intricate political landscape of the time. What is clear is that his persistent defiance, even in the face of overwhelming odds, became a legend, a beacon for those who yearned for freedom from Assyrian rule. The reign of Sennacherib, while marked by military triumphs, also witnessed some of the most brutal and destructive acts against Babylonia. Frustrated by the incessant revolts, particularly those instigated or supported by Babylon, Sennacherib adopted a policy of extreme retribution. In 689 BCE, after yet another Babylonian uprising, this time led by Mushezib-Marduk, Sennacherib unleashed his fury upon the venerable city itself. He ordered the complete destruction of Babylon. The walls, the temples, the palaces, even the very canals that brought life to the city, were systematically demolished. The statues of the gods were shattered, and the rubble was then thrown into the Euphrates, as if to erase Babylon from the very memory of the land. This act was unprecedented in its scale and brutality, even for the Assyrians, who were known for their harshness. The destruction of Babylon was meant to be a final, unequivocal statement. Resistance was futile, and its consequences would be absolute annihilation. Yet, this act of ultimate destruction, rather than quelling dissent, may have inadvertently sown the seeds of Assyria's own downfall. The destruction of Babylon was a shock across the ancient Near East. It alienated not only the Babylonians, but also many other peoples who viewed Babylon as a sacred center of culture and religion. It was an act of sacrilege that resonated far beyond the immediate political sphere. Perhaps the very gods themselves, it was whispered, would turn their faces from such a ruthless empire. Indeed, the Assyrian kings who followed Sennacherib seemed to recognize the profound error of his ways. His successor, Esarhaddon, a man of more nuanced political instincts, embarked on a policy of rebuilding Babylon. He understood that a completely destroyed Babylon was not a source of strength, but a festering wound. He invested heavily in its reconstruction, restoring its temples, rebuilding its walls, and bringing back its exiled population. This was a remarkable shift in policy, an acknowledgement that brute force alone could not maintain an empire. He even went so far as to claim that the gods themselves had decreed Babylon's destruction as a punishment for its sins. But now, having shown sufficient repentance, they desired its restoration. This narrative allowed him to save face while implementing a more conciliatory approach. However, the internal dynamics of the Assyrian Empire were becoming increasingly unstable. The vastness of their conquests, while impressive, stretched their resources thin. Constant campaigning, maintaining garrisons across a sprawling empire, and suppressing endless revolts took a toll on manpower and treasury. The Assyrian heartland itself, once the wellspring of their military might, began to show signs of strain. Furthermore, succession disputes, a perennial weakness of many ancient empires, began to plague the Assyrian court. The reign of Ashurbanipal, Esarhaddon's son, marked the zenith of Assyrian power, but also, perhaps ironically, the beginning of its terminal decline. Ashurbanipal was a formidable ruler, a brilliant military strategist, and a patron of arts and letters, responsible for the famous library at Nineveh, which preserved countless ancient texts. He too faced a significant challenge from Babylonia, this time from his own brother, Shamash-Shumukin, whom he had appointed as king of Babylon. Shamash-Shumukin, despite being Ashurbanipal's brother, harbored ambitions of true independence for Babylon. In 652 BCE, he ignited a massive revolt, uniting various Babylonian factions, including the Chaldeans and Arameans, and once again reaching out to the Elamites, the Arabs, and even some Egyptian forces to form a grand coalition against Ashurbanipal. This was perhaps the largest and most dangerous rebellion Assyria had ever faced. The ensuing civil war lasted for several years. A brutal struggle that drained Assyrian resources and manpower. Ashurbanipal, with his characteristic determination, eventually crushed the rebellion, besieging Babylon for 3 years. The city, weakened by famine, finally fell in 648 BCE, and Shamash-Shumukin perished in the flames of his burning palace, choosing death over capture. Though Ashurbanipal emerged victorious, the cost of this victory was immense. The long war had exhausted Assyria, both militarily, yes, and economically. The constant need to suppress revolts across the empire, from Egypt to Elam, left the Assyrian army stretched thin and weary. The core of the empire was weakened, and its peripheral territories began to slip away. Upon Ashurbanipal's death around 627 BCE, the empire plunged into a period of intense instability, marked by rapid successions and internal strife. The once unbreakable Assyrian grip began to loosen. It was in this crucible of Assyrian weakness that Babylon, phoenix-like, rose again. A new dynasty, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, emerged from the ashes of Assyrian oppression. Its founder was Nabopolassar, a Chaldean chieftain, much like Merodach-Baladan before him, who seized the opportunity presented by Assyria's internal chaos. In 626 BCE, while Assyria was embroiled in yet another succession crisis, Nabopolassar declared himself king of Babylon. This time, there was no powerful Assyrian monarch to immediately crush the rebellion. The Assyrian Empire was too preoccupied with its own survival. Nabopolassar, a shrewd and capable leader, understood that to truly break free, he needed allies. He forged a crucial alliance with the Medes, a powerful Indo-European people to the east, who had also suffered under Assyrian domination and harbored a deep-seated desire for revenge. The Medes, under their king Cyaxares, were a formidable military force, and their alliance with Babylon proved to be the decisive factor in Assyria's ultimate downfall. The combined forces of Babylon and Media launched a series of devastating campaigns against the Assyrian heartland. In 614 BCE, the Medes captured and sacked Ashur, the ancient religious capital of Assyria, a city of immense symbolic importance. The fall of Ashur sent shockwaves across the ancient world, signaling the beginning of the end for the mighty Assyrian Empire. 2 years later, in 612 BCE, the Allied forces converged on Nineveh, the magnificent Assyrian capital, the very city that had once boasted of its invincibility. The siege of Nineveh was a brutal and prolonged affair. The city's massive walls, built by Sennacherib, were thought to be impregnable. However, the combined might of the Babylonian and Median armies, perhaps aided by unusual rains that swelled the Tigris and undermined the city's defenses, proved too much. After 3 months of relentless assault, Nineveh fell. The destruction was comprehensive and merciless, a mirror image of what Sennacherib had inflicted upon Babylon decades earlier. The city was plundered, burned, and largely abandoned, its grandeur reduced to rubble. The once proud capital, which had inspired fear and awe for centuries, became little more than a forgotten mound of earth. This lesser-known detail of the Tigris, potentially aiding the attackers by flooding parts of the city's defenses, adds a layer of natural consequence to the human drama. The fall of Nineveh effectively marked the end of the Assyrian Empire. Though remnants of the Assyrian army, under their last king, Ashur-uballit II, continued to resist for a few more years, retreating to Haran with Egyptian support, their cause was ultimately hopeless. The Babylonians and Medes pursued them relentlessly. The last vestiges of Assyrian power were extinguished by 609 BCE. The empire that had dominated the Near East for centuries, that had inspired both terror and grudging admiration, vanished from the political map, leaving behind a legacy of both unparalleled military might and profound cultural achievements, like Ashurbanipal's library, which would only be rediscovered millennia later. The collapse of Assyria ushered in a new era for Babylonia. From the ashes of relentless conflict and oppression, a new Babylonian empire, known to history as the Neo-Babylonian Empire, rose to prominence. It was a testament to the resilience of the Babylonian spirit, a vindication of the persistent struggles of figures like Merodach-Baladan, and a profound shift in the balance of power. In the ancient world, the stage was now set for Babylon to reclaim its ancient glory, to once again become the radiant center of civilization, perhaps even surpassing its former splendor. The long night of Assyrian domination was over, and the dawn of a new Babylonian golden age was breaking over the Mesopotamian plains. The ashes of Nineveh, still warm and whispering on the wind, marked not an end, but a profound shift in the very architecture of power across the ancient Near East. From the crucible of its destruction, a new star began its ascent, casting a long golden shadow over the Mesopotamian plains. This was Babylon, rising once more, not merely from its own ruins, but from the very dust of Assyrian supremacy. The figure who seized this moment, who saw the potential in the chaos, was Nabopolassar, a Chaldean chieftain whose origins were perhaps humble, but whose ambition burned with a fierce, unwavering flame. He had been a general under the Assyrians, a governor of the Sealand, and then, with a shrewd eye for opportunity, had declared himself king of Babylon in 626 BCE, while Assyria was still powerful, though internally fractured. It was a bold move, a declaration of independence, that set in motion the events leading to Nineveh's fall. Nabopolassar understood that true dominion was not just about military might, but about the heart and soul of a civilization. He envisioned a Babylon that would surpass even its glorious past, a city that would be a beacon of culture, wealth, and spiritual significance. His reign, though often overshadowed by that of his illustrious son, laid the essential groundwork for the Neo-Babylonian Empire's golden age. He began the meticulous process of rebuilding the city's infrastructure, repairing ancient temples, and restoring the canals that were the lifeblood of Mesopotamian agriculture. He also solidified the empire's borders, pushing back against lingering Assyrian remnants and securing access to vital trade routes. Yet, his greatest contribution was perhaps less tangible. He instilled a sense of renewed pride and purpose in the Babylonian people, a belief that their destiny was to reclaim their rightful place at the center of the world. When Nabopolassar passed from this world in 605 BCE, the mantle of kingship fell upon his son, Nebuchadnezzar II. This was a man forged in the fires of war, having already proven his military prowess in the decisive Battle of Carchemish just months before his father's death, where he crushed the Egyptian forces allied with the remaining Assyrian elements. Nebuchadnezzar's reign, spanning over 4 decades until 562 BCE, would become synonymous with the Neo-Babylonian Empire's zenith. He inherited a burgeoning empire and transformed it into a legend, a name that would echo through millennia. Nebuchadnezzar's vision for Babylon was grand, almost impossibly so. He sought to create a city that was not merely a capital, but a monument to his power and to the glory of the gods, particularly Marduk, the city's patron deity. He embarked on an unparalleled building program, transforming Babylon into the largest and most magnificent metropolis of its time. The city's defenses were paramount. He constructed massive double walls, often referred to as the Imgur Enlil and Nimidi Enlil, so wide that chariots could reportedly turn on their tops. These formidable fortifications, combined with a moat fed by the Euphrates, made Babylon seem impregnable. Archaeological evidence, particularly from German excavations in the early 20th century, has revealed the astonishing scale of these walls, with the inner wall alone being several meters thick. Beyond defense, Nebuchadnezzar focused on the city's splendor. The processional way, leading to the Ishtar Gate, was perhaps the most breathtaking example of his architectural ambition. This sacred avenue, paved with red and white stones, was lined with magnificent glazed brick reliefs of lions, dragons, and bulls, symbols of the gods Ishtar, Marduk, and Adad. The Ishtar Gate itself, now partially reconstructed in Berlin's Pergamon Museum, was a dazzling spectacle of blue glazed bricks, adorned with hundreds of these vibrant animal figures. It was not merely an entrance, it was a statement, a gateway to a divine city, designed to inspire awe and reverence in all who passed through it. Imagine walking beneath those shimmering blue bricks, feeling the ancient dust beneath your feet, and gazing up at the mythical creatures that guarded the city's heart. At the very core of Babylon stood the Esagila, the temple complex dedicated to Marduk, and beside it, the Etemenanki, the great ziggurat, often believed to be the inspiration for the biblical Tower of Babel. Nebuchadnezzar meticulously restored and enhanced these sacred structures. The Etemenanki, a colossal stepped tower, was said to have reached a staggering height, perhaps nearing 90 meters, its 7 tiers rising towards the heavens, a stairway for the gods to descend to earth. While its exact dimensions and appearance are still debated among scholars, with some suggesting it was more of a symbolic mountain than a functional tower, the sheer ambition of its construction is undeniable. It was a testament to Babylonian piety and engineering prowess, a tangible link between the earthly realm and the divine. The city was crisscrossed by canals and waterways, not just for irrigation, but for transportation, making Babylon a bustling hub of commerce. Goods flowed in from distant lands, timber from Lebanon, precious metals from Anatolia, spices from Arabia. The markets of Babylon were a kaleidoscope of sights, sounds, and smells, a testament to its economic vibrancy. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, are another enduring symbol of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, though their existence remains a subject of considerable scholarly debate. Ancient Greek historians, like Berossus and Diodorus Siculus, describe terraced gardens, irrigated by complex machinery, filled with exotic plants and trees, built by Nebuchadnezzar for his homesick Median wife Imatis. However, despite extensive archaeological excavations, no definitive evidence of these gardens has ever been found in Babylon itself. Some historians now speculate they might have been located in Nineveh, built by the Assyrian king Sennacherib, or perhaps they were merely a poetic embellishment, a legend born from the city's overall lushness and grandeur. Regardless of their physical reality, the myth of the Hanging Gardens speaks volumes about the perception of Babylon as a place of unparalleled beauty and engineering marvel. Nebuchadnezzar was not just a builder, he was a formidable military leader, securing and expanding his empire. His campaigns against Judah are particularly well documented in biblical texts, leading to the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BCE and the exile of its population to Babylon. This event, known as the Babylonian captivity, had a profound and lasting impact on Jewish history and identity. Yet, from a Babylonian perspective, it was simply another successful campaign, consolidating control over a rebellious vassal state. The wealth and skilled artisans brought back from these conquered territories undoubtedly contributed to Babylon's burgeoning prosperity and artistic achievements. Life in Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon was a tapestry woven with threads of deep religious devotion, meticulous administration, and vibrant urban life. Priests performed elaborate rituals in the temples, astronomers meticulously charted the heavens from the ziggurat, and scribes recorded everything from royal decrees to commercial transactions on clay tablets. The city was a melting pot of cultures, home to various ethnic groups, including the exiled Judeans, who contributed to its diverse intellectual and economic landscape. The legal system, based on ancient Mesopotamian traditions, ensured a degree of order and justice, while the royal palace, a sprawling complex known as the Southern Palace, housed the king and his vast retinue, serving as the administrative heart of the empire. However, the very grandeur of Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon also contained the seeds of its future vulnerability. The immense resources poured into building projects and military campaigns, while showcasing the empire's strength, also placed a significant strain on its economy and manpower. Furthermore, the reliance on a single powerful ruler meant that the stability of the empire was intrinsically linked to the competence and foresight of the king. After Nebuchadnezzar's long and prosperous reign, a period of instability followed, with several short-lived kings ascending to the throne, each struggling to maintain the empire's cohesion. The legacy of Nebuchadnezzar II and his Neo-Babylonian Empire is complex and multifaceted. It was an era of unparalleled architectural achievement, a golden age of art and science, and a period when Babylon truly emerged as the ancient world's greatest city, a shining jewel in the Mesopotamian crown. The sheer scale of its construction, the beauty of its art, and the sophistication of its administrative systems were truly remarkable. Historians still debate the precise motivations behind Nebuchadnezzar's relentless building program. Was it purely for religious devotion, a genuine desire to honor Marduk, or was it also a calculated display of power, a way to project an image of invincible might and divine favor to both his subjects and his rivals? Perhaps it was both, intertwined in the mind of a king who saw himself as the earthly embodiment of the god's will. The echoes of Babylon's splendor resonated far beyond its physical walls, influencing subsequent cultures and civilizations. Its astronomical knowledge, meticulously recorded over centuries, formed the basis for later Greek and Hellenistic astronomy. Its administrative practices and legal traditions contributed to the development of governance in the ancient world. The very name Babylon became synonymous with grandeur, wealth, and, eventually, with moral decay and hubris in later Judeo-Christian traditions. Yet, for a brief, glorious period, it was the undisputed center of the world, a city whose golden spires touched the clouds and whose streets teemed with life, a testament to the enduring power of human ambition and creativity. And as the sun set over the Euphrates, casting long shadows across the glazed brick lions of the Ishtar Gate, one could almost hear the whispers of a city that had truly risen from the ashes, claiming its place among the stars. As the dust of Assyrian tyranny settled, a new dawn broke over Mesopotamia, heralded by the rise of a king whose name would forever be etched in the annals of time, Nebuchadnezzar II. His reign, spanning from approximately 605 to 562 BCE, marked the zenith of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, transforming Babylon into a city of unparalleled splendor and power, a true golden age that captivated the ancient world. It was a time when the very bricks of Babylon seemed to hum with ambition and artistic genius, when the city itself became a testament to human ingenuity and the boundless aspirations of a monarch. Under Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon was not merely rebuilt, it was reimagined, sculpted from the earth into a dazzling metropolis that dwarfed all others. The city's defenses were formidable, encircled by massive double walls, so broad that according to some ancient accounts, chariots could turn upon them. These walls, constructed from millions of sun-dried and kiln-fired bricks, were not just barriers, but symbols of impregnability, designed to inspire awe and deter any potential aggressor. The Euphrates River, ever the lifeblood of the land, flowed directly through the city, its banks lined with quays and palaces, reflecting the glittering skyline in its ancient waters. The most iconic entrance to this resplendent city was undoubtedly the Ishtar Gate. This magnificent portal, dedicated to the goddess Ishtar, was a symphony of glazed bricks, shimmering in vibrant blues, yellows, and whites. Adorning its surfaces were hundreds of relief figures of sacred animals, fierce lions, symbolizing Ishtar herself, powerful bulls, representing the god Adad, and mythical dragons, or Mushkushu, sacred to Marduk, the patron deity of Babylon. Each creature was rendered with breathtaking detail, their forms leaping out from the brilliant blue background, as if guardians frozen in mid-stride. Imagine approaching this gate, its polished surfaces gleaming under the Mesopotamian sun, the vivid colors a stark contrast to the ochre landscape, a true spectacle that announced the grandeur within. It was part of a grand processional way, a broad avenue leading directly to the heart of the city. Used for religious festivals and royal ceremonies, where statues of the gods were carried in solemn procession. Beyond the Ishtar Gate, the city unfolded in a tapestry of architectural marvels. The Edamananki, the great ziggurat dedicated to Marduk, rose majestically towards the heavens. Its 7 towering stages said to have inspired the biblical tale of the Tower of Babel. Though now largely ruins, its sheer scale in its prime must have been breathtaking. A man-made mountain, reaching for the divine, a testament to the Babylonian belief in connecting the earthly realm with the celestial. Around its base, temples and shrines, dedicated to various deities, formed a sacred precinct, bustling with priests, pilgrims, and the daily rituals of a devout populace. But perhaps the most enduring and enigmatic legacy of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, shrouded in both legend and historical debate, are the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Described by ancient Greek writers as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, these gardens were said to be a terraced paradise, an artificial mountain of lush greenery rising from the arid plains. The common narrative suggests Nebuchadnezzar built them to appease his homesick Median wife, Amidis, who longed for the verdant hills of her homeland. Imagine a series of ascending terraces, supported by massive stone arches, each level overflowing with exotic trees, fragrant flowers, and cascading vines, watered by an ingenious system that lifted water from the Euphrates high above. The air would have been thick with the scent of blossoms, a verdant oasis in the heart of a bustling city. However, historians still disagree whether the Hanging Gardens truly existed in Babylon, or if they were a romanticized invention, perhaps even confused with gardens in the Assyrian city of Nineveh. No definitive archaeological evidence has ever been found in Babylon to substantiate their existence, leading to scholarly debate and a fascinating historical mystery. Some theories suggest they were not hanging in the modern sense, but rather overhanging terraces, or perhaps they were merely a particularly impressive example of Babylonian irrigation and horticulture, exaggerated over time by awestruck visitors. Regardless of their exact nature or even their very existence, the legend of the Hanging Gardens speaks volumes about the perception of Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, a place of such immense wealth and engineering prowess that even the most fantastical creations seemed plausible. Beyond the architectural splendor, Nebuchadnezzar's reign was also marked by significant territorial expansion and consolidation. He inherited an empire forged by his father, Nabopolassar, who had liberated Babylon from Assyrian rule. Nebuchadnezzar continued this expansionist policy, leading his armies to conquer vast swathes of the Near East. His most famous military campaign was against the Kingdom of Judah, culminating in the siege and destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BCE. This event led to the Babylonian captivity, a pivotal moment in Jewish history, where many of the Jewish elite were deported to Babylon. This forced migration, though a tragedy for the Judeans, also brought new populations and ideas into the heart of the empire, contributing to Babylon's cosmopolitan character. Nebuchadnezzar's empire stretched from the Persian Gulf in the south to parts of Anatolia in the north, and from Egypt in the west to the Zagros Mountains in the east. This vast dominion was maintained through a sophisticated administrative system, with provincial governors reporting directly to the king. Trade flourished, with goods flowing from distant lands into Babylon's bustling markets. The city became a melting pot of cultures, languages, and religions, reflecting the diverse peoples under Babylonian rule. Perhaps the sounds of Aramaic, Akkadian, Hebrew, and Egyptian mingled in the crowded bazaars, creating a vibrant, polyglot symphony of commerce and daily life. Nebuchadnezzar also invested heavily in infrastructure beyond the city walls. He oversaw the construction of canals and irrigation systems, vital for the agricultural productivity of Mesopotamia, ensuring a steady supply of food for his growing empire. These canals not only facilitated agriculture, but also served as important transportation routes, connecting distant regions and aiding in the movement of goods and troops. He was a meticulous planner, a king who understood that true power lay not just in military might, but in the prosperity and well-being of his subjects. The king was also a devout patron of the arts and sciences. Babylonian scribes continued to meticulously record astronomical observations, building upon centuries of accumulated knowledge. They developed sophisticated mathematical systems, including a base 60 numerical system that still influences our division of time and circles today. Astrologers, often one and the same as astronomers, charted the movements of celestial bodies, believing they held clues to earthly events and the will of the gods. These intellectual pursuits, fostered under royal patronage, contributed to Babylon's reputation as a center of learning and wisdom. Imagine the quiet intensity of scholars beneath the flickering lamplight, their cuneiform tablets filled with intricate calculations and observations of the night sky, their minds reaching for understanding of the cosmos. Despite his immense power and accomplishments, Nebuchadnezzar's reign, like all human endeavors, was finite. Upon his death in 562 BCE, the empire he had so painstakingly built began a slow, almost imperceptible decline. His successors lacked his vision, his military acumen, and his political shrewdness. A series of short-lived reigns and internal strife. Weakened the empire from within, making it vulnerable to external pressures. The Golden Age, though brilliant, proved to be a fleeting chapter in Babylon's long history. Yet the echoes of Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, with its shimmering Ishtar Gate, its legendary gardens, and its towering ziggurat, continue to resonate through time, a testament to a king who dared to dream on a grand scale, and for a time made those dreams a magnificent reality. The city he crafted became a legend, a whispered tale of opulence and power that would inspire awe and wonder for millennia to come. The golden age of Nebuchadnezzar, for all its splendor, was but a fleeting moment in the long twilight of empires. His reign, a magnificent crescendo of power and artistry, was followed by a discordant diminuendo, a rapid succession of kings who struggled to hold the vast realm together. The mighty walls of Babylon, which he had so painstakingly erected, seemed to whisper not of eternal strength, but of the fragility of human ambition. Upon Nebuchadnezzar's death in 562 BCE, the throne passed to his son, Amel-Marduk. The transition was not smooth, and the echoes of discontent began to reverberate through the palace halls. Amel-Marduk's reign was brief and shadowed by political intrigue. He is perhaps best remembered for an act of unexpected clemency, the release of Jehoiakim, the former king of Judah, from his long imprisonment in Babylon, an event recorded in the biblical book of 2 Kings. This gesture, while seemingly minor in the grand tapestry of Babylonian politics, hinted at a shift in the court's priorities, or perhaps a weakening of the iron will that had characterized Nebuchadnezzar's rule. But whatever his intentions, Amel-Marduk's time on the throne was cut short. After only 2 years, in 560 BCE, he was assassinated, likely by his brother-in-law, Neriglissar. Neriglissar, a prominent general and a man of considerable influence during Nebuchadnezzar's time, seized the crown. His ascension marked a clear shift towards military rule, a desperate attempt to stabilize a kingdom already showing cracks. He launched campaigns, notably against Cilicia, in an effort to reassert Babylonian dominance and secure trade routes that were vital to the empire's economy. The inscriptions that survive from his reign speak of military prowess and strategic acumen, suggesting a ruler who understood the precariousness of his position. Yet, even a seasoned general like Neriglissar could not stem the tide of internal decay. The constant maneuvering for power among the elite, the shifting loyalties within the vast bureaucracy, and the burgeoning external pressures were a hydra-headed challenge. His reign, though more stable than his predecessors, lasted only 4 years, ending in 556 BCE. The throne then passed to Neriglissar's young son, Labashi-Marduk. But the boy king was a mere pawn in the ruthless game of palace politics. His youth and inexperience made him vulnerable, and the powerful factions within the court saw an opportunity to further their own agendas. Accounts differ on the exact circumstances of his demise, but it is widely believed that he was murdered after only a few months, a tragic footnote in a rapidly unraveling dynasty. This swift succession of short-lived rulers, each ending in violence or deposition, painted a stark picture of a kingdom in turmoil, its foundations eroding from within. The once unshakable authority of the king, so powerfully embodied by Nebuchadnezzar, had become a contested prize, a symbol of instability rather than strength. Into this maelstrom stepped Nabonidus, a man of unusual character and a figure of much historical debate. He was not of the royal line, though he likely had connections to the priestly class or the military aristocracy. His ascension in 556 BCE marked a distinct departure from the traditional succession, signaling the complete breakdown of the established order. Nabonidus, unlike his immediate predecessors, seemed less interested in military conquest or the grand architectural projects that had defined Nebuchadnezzar's era. Instead, his focus shifted towards religious matters, particularly the worship of the moon god, Sin. This devotion, however, was not universally welcomed. The powerful priesthood of Marduk, the patron god of Babylon, and the traditional head of the Babylonian pantheon, viewed Nabonidus's religious reforms with suspicion and resentment. This religious dispute, a subtle but profound schism within the heart of the empire, would prove to be a significant fact. Or in its eventual downfall, Nabonidus spent a considerable portion of his reign, approximately 10 years away from Babylon, residing in the oasis city of Tema in Arabia. The reasons for this prolonged absence are a subject of enduring scholarly dispute. Some historians suggest he sought to secure vital trade routes or to consolidate power in a region less influenced by the powerful Marduk priesthood. Others propose a more personal motivation, perhaps a genuine spiritual quest, or even a desire to escape the suffocating political intrigues of the capital. During his absence, his son Belshazzar was left in charge of Babylon, acting as regent. This arrangement, while seemingly practical, further alienated the Marduk priesthood and the general populace, who felt abandoned by their king. The New Year's festival, a crucial annual ritual in Babylon, could not be properly celebrated without the king's presence, leading to growing discontent and a sense of spiritual unease. The vibrant pulse of the city, once so strong, seemed to falter in the king's absence. While the Neo-Babylonian Empire was consumed by internal strife and religious discord, a new and formidable power was rising on its eastern flank, the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Under the brilliant leadership of Cyrus the Great, the Persians were rapidly consolidating their control over the Median Empire and expanding their dominion. Cyrus, a master strategist and a charismatic leader, was not only a military genius, but also a shrewd politician. He understood the power of propaganda and the importance of winning over the hearts and minds of conquered peoples. His approach was a stark contrast to the often brutal tactics of the Assyrians, and at times, the Babylonians. The first major clash between the burgeoning Persian power and the established empires came with Cyrus's conquest of Lydia, a wealthy kingdom in Anatolia, in 547 BCE. This victory brought the Persians to the very borders of the Babylonian sphere of influence and sent a chilling message throughout the Near East. The Lydian king, Croesus, famous for his immense wealth, had formed an alliance with Babylon, Egypt, and Sparta to counter the Persian threat. His defeat, however, demonstrated the formidable strength of Cyrus's army and the fragility of these alliances. The fall of Sardis, Lydia's capital, echoed like a warning bell across the Mesopotamian plains. As the Persian threat loomed larger, Babylon's internal divisions only deepened. The Marduk priesthood, increasingly disillusioned with Nabonidus, began to view Cyrus not as an enemy, but as a potential liberator. Persian propaganda skillfully exploited these internal tensions, portraying Cyrus as a righteous ruler, chosen by the gods, who would restore order and proper religious observance. The famous Cyrus cylinder, a clay cylinder inscribed with a declaration in Akkadian cuneiform, depicts Cyrus as a benevolent ruler who respected local cults and restored displaced peoples. While its historical accuracy is debated, its effectiveness as a tool of political persuasion is undeniable. It painted a picture of a king who would bring peace and stability, a stark contrast to the tumultuous reign of Nabonidus. The final act of the Babylonian drama unfolded in 539 BCE. Cyrus, having meticulously prepared his forces and cultivated alliances, launched his decisive campaign against Babylon. The Persian army, well-trained and highly motivated, moved swiftly. The Babylonian army, perhaps demoralized by years of internal strife and the perceived neglect of their king, offered little resistance in the open field. The decisive battle took place at Opis, a strategic location on the Tigris River, where the Babylonian forces were routed. This defeat opened the path to the capital. The fall of Babylon itself is shrouded in a mixture of historical fact and legendary embellishment. The Greek historian Herodotus recounts a dramatic tale of Cyrus diverting the Euphrates River, allowing his troops to march into the city along the dry riverbed under the cover of night. While this account is vivid and compelling, archaeological evidence and Babylonian chronicles suggest a less dramatic, though no less significant entry. The Babylonian chronicle, known as the Nabonidus Chronicle, states simply that the army of Cyrus entered Babylon without battle. This suggests that the city may have surrendered, perhaps even welcomed, the Persian forces. The gates, perhaps left unguarded or opened by sympathetic factions within the city, allowed Cyrus's army to enter unopposed. Belshazzar, who was in Babylon at the time, is depicted in the biblical book of Daniel as holding a great feast on the night the city fell, famously seeing the writing on the wall, foretelling his doom. While the historical accuracy of this specific narrative is debated, it captures the sense of impending catastrophe and the perceived complacency within the Babylonian court. Whether he was killed during the takeover or executed shortly thereafter, Belshazzar's end marked the effective end of independent Babylonian rule. With the entry of Cyrus, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which had risen from the ashes of Assyrian power and flourished under Nebuchadnezzar, ceased to exist as an independent political entity. Babylon, the magnificent city, the heart of an empire, became a provincial capital within the vast Achaemenid Persian Empire. The Golden Age was over. Yet, the city itself, with its towering ziggurat, its grand palaces, and its intricate network of canals continued to thrive for centuries under Persian rule, a testament to its enduring cultural and economic significance. But the power that had once radiated from its walls, the authority that had once dictated the fate of nations, had passed into new hands. The dreams of Nebuchadnezzar, of an eternal empire, had dissolved like mist in the morning sun, leaving behind only the echoes of a glorious past and the silent witness of its monumental ruins. The wind, perhaps, still whispers through the ancient bricks, carrying the faint scent of incense and the distant murmur of a once mighty civilization. The desert winds, which had for so long carried the echoes of Babylonian might, now began to whisper a new name across the vast Mesopotamian plains: Cyrus. Far to the east, in the rugged lands of Anshan, a new power was rising, one that would soon cast its long shadow over the ancient world. This was the Achaemenid Empire, born from the ambition and genius of Cyrus the Great. He was not merely a conqueror, but a visionary, one who understood that true power lay not just in military might, but in the hearts and minds of the conquered. The story of Cyrus truly begins with his rebellion against the Median Empire, his maternal grandfather Astyages' realm, which had long held sway over the Persian tribes. By 550 BCE, Cyrus had overthrown the Medes, absorbing their territories and military strength into his burgeoning empire. This was a pivotal moment, as it transformed a regional power into a formidable force capable of challenging the established empires of the Near East. Lydia, a wealthy kingdom in Anatolia ruled by the legendary Croesus, was the first to feel the full weight of Cyrus's ambition. Croesus, famed for his immense riches, consulted the Oracle of Delphi, who famously told him that if he attacked Persia, a great empire would fall. Misinterpreting this as a prophecy of Persian defeat, Croesus launched his campaign, only to find his own empire crumble before Cyrus's strategic brilliance by 547 BCE. The fall of Lydia, with its vast gold reserves, further enriched the Achaemenid treasury and extended Persian dominion to the shores of the Aegean Sea. With Lydia secured, Cyrus turned his gaze southward, towards the heart of Mesopotamia, towards Babylon. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, under its last native king, Nabonidus, was experiencing internal strife. Nabonidus, a curious and scholarly monarch, had a particular devotion to the moon god Sin, often neglecting the traditional cult of Marduk, the patron deity of Babylon. He spent much of his reign away from the capital, in the oasis city of Tema in Arabia, leaving his son Belshazzar to rule as regent in Babylon. This absence and perceived impiety alienated the powerful Marduk priesthood and much of the Babylonian populace, who felt their ancient traditions and divine favor were being disregarded. The Persian approach was not a sudden, thunderous invasion, but a careful, calculated maneuver steeped in psychological warfare. Cyrus understood the disaffection within Babylon and exploited it. His propaganda painted him not as a foreign oppressor, but as a liberator, chosen by Marduk himself to restore order and reverence to the city. The famous Cyrus cylinder, a clay barrel inscribed with cuneiform text, describes his benevolent policies and his claim to have been chosen by Marduk to restore the cults of the gods to their rightful places. It states, "He, Marduk, scanned and looked through all the countries, searching for a righteous ruler, a king after his own heart, whom he would take by the hand. He called out his name, Cyrus, king of Anshan." This was a masterstroke, appealing directly to the religious sensibilities of the Babylonians and undermining Nabonidus's legitimacy. The final act of the Babylonian Empire unfolded in 539 BCE. The Persian army, led by Gobryas, one of Cyrus's generals, advanced towards Babylon. The city, with its massive walls and the Euphrates flowing through its heart, was considered impregnable. Legend says that during a great feast, perhaps the very one described in the biblical book of Daniel, where Mene, Mene, Tekel Upharsin was written on the wall, the Persians diverted the Euphrates River. They lowered the water level, allowing their soldiers to march along the riverbed and enter the city through the unguarded river gates. This audacious tactic, if true, speaks volumes about Persian ingenuity and the element of surprise. However, some historians debate the exact details of the entry, suggesting that perhaps a portion of the population, disillusioned with Nabonidus, simply opened the gates from within. The Babylonian Chronicle, a contemporary historical text, simply states, on the 16th day of Tashritu, Gobryas, the governor of Gudium, and the army of Cyrus entered Babylon without battle. This phrase, without battle, is key, suggesting a largely peaceful capitulation rather than a bloody siege. Nabonidus was captured, and his son Belshazzar was reportedly killed. Cyrus himself entered Babylon shortly thereafter, not as a destructive conqueror, but as a benevolent ruler. He ordered his troops to refrain from looting and desecrating temples. He paid homage to Marduk and participated in the traditional New Year festival, presenting himself as a legitimate successor to the Babylonian kings. This policy of religious tolerance and respect for local customs was a hallmark of Cyrus's rule and a stark contrast to the Assyrian practice of mass deportation and destruction. The Jewish exiles, who had lived in Babylon since Nebuchadnezzar's conquests, were allowed to return to Judah and rebuild their temple in Jerusalem, a policy explicitly mentioned in the biblical books of Ezra and Isaiah. This act of liberation further solidified Cyrus's image as a magnanimous ruler. The fall of Babylon was not a cataclysmic end, but a transition. The city, though no longer the seat of an independent empire, remained an important administrative center and a jewel in the crown of the Achaemenid Empire. Its vast resources, skilled artisans, and strategic location continued to serve the Persians. The magnificent Ishtar Gate, the processional way, and the towering ziggurat of Etemenanke, though perhaps not as grand as in their heyday, still stood as testaments to Babylonian architectural prowess. Persian governors resided within its walls, overseeing its affairs, and Persian scribes adopted cuneiform for administrative purposes, blending their own systems with the sophisticated Babylonian bureaucracy. One lesser-known detail from this period is the existence of the Murashu family archives. This collection of thousands of cuneiform tablets, discovered in the city of Nippur, details the business dealings of a wealthy Babylonian banking house that flourished during the Persian period. These archives provide a fascinating glimpse into the continued economic vitality of Mesopotamia under Persian rule, showing that life, commerce, and legal systems continued largely uninterrupted. They reveal a complex society of land leases, loans, and business partnerships, demonstrating that the Babylonian economy did not collapse, but adapted and thrived within the larger Persian framework. Yet despite this apparent continuity, a subtle shift had occurred. A heart of imperial power had moved east to cities like Pasargadae and later Persepolis, built by Cyrus and his successors. Babylon, once the undisputed mistress of Mesopotamia, became one among many great cities in a vast empire that stretched from the Aegean to the Indus. Its unique identity, while preserved in many ways, was now subsumed into a larger, more diverse whole. Historians still debate the extent to which the Babylonian elite truly welcomed Cyrus. While the official Persian narrative and some Babylonian sources suggest a peaceful transition, there were undoubtedly elements within the city who mourned the loss of their independence and saw the Persians as foreign overlords, regardless of their benevolent policies. Was the peaceful entry a genuine welcome, or merely the strategic avoidance of a costly siege by a populace too weary or divided to resist? The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a complex tapestry of acceptance, resignation, and perhaps even quiet rebellion. The legacy of Cyrus's conquest was profound. It marked the end of an era of independent Mesopotamian empires and the beginning of a long period of foreign rule. Yet it also ushered in an age of unprecedented imperial organization and cultural exchange. The Achaemenid Empire, with its vast network of roads, its efficient postal system, and its policy of religious tolerance, created a framework that allowed diverse cultures to coexist and flourish. The wisdom and knowledge accumulated in Babylon, its astronomical observations, its legal precedents, and its administrative practices were absorbed and disseminated throughout the Persian world, influencing subsequent empires for centuries to come. The grand vision of Cyrus, to rule through respect rather than fear, ensured that Babylon, though conquered, would endure, its ancient whispers blending with the new sounds of Persian imperial might, echoing across the plains of Mesopotamia for centuries more. The echoes of Babylon's grandeur, even as its physical form began to crumble, resonated far beyond the Fertile Crescent, shaping the very firmament of human understanding. Its most profound and lasting influence undoubtedly lay in the celestial sphere. The meticulous astronomical observations, painstakingly recorded on clay tablets over centuries, formed the bedrock of later Greek and Indian astronomy. Babylonian priests, keen observers of the night sky, developed sophisticated mathematical models to predict lunar eclipses and planetary movements with remarkable accuracy. They were among the first to divide the circle into 360 degrees and the hour into 60 minutes, a system that remarkably persists in our measurements of time and angles to this day. Imagine the quiet, starlit nights on the ziggurat tops, the patient scribes charting the slow dance of Venus or the predictable rhythm of the moon, each observation a tiny thread woven into the vast tapestry of cosmic knowledge. This astronomical legacy intertwined deeply with their religious beliefs, as the movements of the heavens were seen as divine omens and messages. The concept of the zodiac, with its 12 constellations corresponding to specific periods of the year, originated in Mesopotamia, a framework still recognized, if not scientifically validated, across many cultures. While the Greeks later refined and popularized these concepts, the foundational work, the raw data, and the initial interpretive frameworks were unequivocally Babylonian. Beyond the stars, Babylon's legal and administrative innovations also left an indelible mark. The Code of Hammurabi, though predating the Neo-Babylonian Empire, set a precedent for codified law that influenced subsequent legal systems. The meticulous record-keeping, the development of sophisticated contractual agreements, and the bureaucratic structures necessary to manage a vast empire provided templates that later empires, including the Achaemenid Persians, would adapt and refine. Even the very concept of a central bank, albeit in a rudimentary form, can be glimpsed in the temple treasuries and royal storehouses that managed vast quantities of goods and precious metals. However, the golden age of Neo-Babylon, for all its splendor and innovation, was relatively brief. The forces that had allowed Babylon to rise, its strategic location and agricultural wealth, also made it a coveted prize. The first major challenge came from the burgeoning power of Persia under Cyrus the Great. In 539 BCE, A mere 88 years after Nebuchadnezzar II ascended the throne, Babylon fell to Cyrus without a significant battle. The narrative, as recounted by Herodotus and later elaborated in the biblical book of Daniel, speaks of a night of feasting within the city walls, while Cyrus's engineers diverted the Euphrates, allowing his troops to march along the dry riverbed directly into the heart of the city. While the dramatic details might be embellished, the swiftness of the conquest suggests internal dissent or a lack of preparedness. Nabonidus, the last king of Babylon, had alienated many, particularly the powerful Marduk priesthood, by his devotion to the moon god Sin and his prolonged absence from the capital. This disaffection likely smoothed Cyrus's entry. Under Persian rule, Babylon initially retained its importance as a major administrative center and a provincial capital. Cyrus, renowned for his policy of religious tolerance, allowed the exiled Judeans to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple, a significant event recorded in the Hebrew Bible. Babylon's walls remained formidable, its temples continued to function, and its scholars pursued their studies. However, its political independence was irrevocably lost. When the city rebelled against Persian rule on several occasions, particularly under Darius I and Xerxes I, its defenses were systematically dismantled and its sacred images removed, gradually diminishing its status. Xerxes, in particular, after a rebellion around 482 BCE, is believed to have destroyed the Esagila, the Temple of Marduk, and possibly the Etemenanki ziggurat, though the extent of this destruction is a point of scholarly debate. Some historians argue that the Etemenanki, already in disrepair, simply ceased to be maintained, rather than being actively razed. The next great power to sweep through Mesopotamia was that of Alexander the Great. In 331 BCE, after his decisive victory over Darius III at the Battle of Gaugamela, Alexander entered Babylon. Unlike the Persians, he was welcomed as a liberator. He ordered the restoration of the temples, including the Esagila, and planned to make Babylon the capital of his vast empire. He even began the ambitious project of clearing the debris from the Etemenanki ziggurat, intending to rebuild it to its former glory. For a brief period, Babylon experienced a resurgence, a final flicker of its former prominence. However, Alexander's sudden death in Babylon in 323 BCE, at the age of 32, shattered these dreams. His generals, the Diadochi, plunged into a series of destructive wars, and Babylon, caught in the crossfire, suffered immensely. With the rise of the Seleucid Empire, founded by Seleucus I Nicator, one of Alexander's generals, the focus of power shifted. Seleucus founded a new capital, Seleucia on the Tigris, approximately 90 kilometers north of Babylon. This new city, strategically located on the Tigris and with access to new trade routes, gradually siphoned off Babylon's population and resources. The grand temples and palaces of Babylon fell into disuse, their bricks plundered for new construction. By the 2nd century BCE, Babylon was largely abandoned, a ghost city of crumbling walls and wind-swept ruins. Strabo, a Greek geographer writing in the 1st century CE, described Babylon as a vast desert, with only a small portion inhabited. The once mighty city, the heart of an empire, slowly dissolved back into the earth from which it had been built, its monumental structures becoming little more than mounds of earth. For nearly 2 millennia, Babylon lay buried, its very location a subject of conjecture and legend. Travelers and pilgrims would sometimes stumble upon massive brick mounds, but their significance was often lost to time. The biblical narratives, particularly those in Isaiah and Jeremiah, which prophesied Babylon's utter desolation, contributed to the perception that the city was cursed and best left undisturbed. It was not until the 19th century that the rediscovery of ancient Mesopotamia truly began. European explorers and archaeologists, driven by a thirst for knowledge and spurred by the decipherment of cuneiform, began to systematically excavate the tells, the artificial mounds that marked the sites of ancient cities. Among the earliest to visit the site of Babylon was Claudius James Rich in 1811, who made initial surveys and collected artifacts. However, large-scale scientific excavation did not begin until 1899, led by the German archaeologist Robert Koldewey. Koldewey's excavations, which continued for 18 years until 1917, were groundbreaking. He meticulously uncovered the city's layout, identifying the processional way, the Ishtar Gate, the foundations of the Etemenanke Ziggurat, and Nebuchadnezzar's palaces. His team painstakingly documented the various building phases, using the distinctive baked bricks stamped with Nebuchadnezzar's name as a key chronological marker. It was Koldewey who, through careful observation of the massive foundations and the thick walls, first posited the location of the Hanging Gardens, though definitive archaeological proof remains elusive, leading to ongoing scholarly debate about their exact location or even their very existence as a physical structure within the city. Some theories suggest they were a mythical creation, others place them outside the main city, and still others propose they were simply terraced gardens on the palace roof, rather hen the towering wonder often depicted. The artifacts unearthed by Koldewey and subsequent archaeologists, housed in museums around the world, brought Babylon back to life. The vibrant blue and yellow glazed bricks of the Ishtar Gate, reconstructed in Berlin's Pergamon Museum, offer a breathtaking glimpse into the city's aesthetic grandeur. Thousands of cuneiform tablets, detailing everything from astronomical observations to mundane commercial transactions, have provided an unparalleled window into Babylonian society, economy, and intellectual life. These tablets, painstakingly translated, continue to reveal new facets of this ancient civilization, challenging previous assumptions and enriching our understanding of the ancient world. The legacy of Babylon, therefore, is not merely one of ruins and forgotten empires. It is a living legacy, woven into the fabric of our modern world. From the divisions of time and space that govern our daily lives, to the very concept of codified law, to the foundational elements of astronomy, Babylon's influence subtly persists. Its story, one of ambition, innovation, conquest, and eventual decline, serves as a powerful reminder of the cyclical nature of history and the enduring human quest for knowledge and meaning, a quest that began, in so many ways, under the watchful gaze of the Babylonian stars.